Squidge.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the #1 place to give the internet even more internet by making your own website.
Squidge.
Genuine question, at what point does something stop being an upset? It took Ireland 111 years to beat the All Blacks, but as anyone who's ever spent a few days in Limerick can tell you, when it rains on the Emerald Isle, it goddamn pours. This Saturday, Jacqueline Wilson-Sexrog and his team in green made it 3 wins from 5 against a side who had the hoodoo over them for over a century, turning the tide of expectations and posing that question. Is Ireland beating the All Blacks still even an upset? Ireland kind of became New Zealand's bogey team about 8 years ago, with their only win since coming in the return game a week later in Chicago. And now I know this enough. I'll come back to it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But Saturday presented a fixture without fluke or even historic level individual performances. Saturday was a team in green beating a team in black by being an outright better rugby team. So how, why, what how did they do it? And what can we say about Andy Farrell's Ireland going forwards and our Ian Foster's All Blacks going backwards? It's been a really weird year for the All Blacks. They've broken the world record for most points scored in the calendar year, yet never looked quite as dominant, composed or unbeatable as the force they once were. Regular wobbles masked by 7-minute soul splinterers in the second half. Games against Australia, Wales, Argentina and even Italy looking like opportunities for upset until they crushed the hopes of a nation for another generation with several scores in quick succession late on, inflating the scoreboard in the process. However, whilst the game management and organisational attack have swung up, down, left, right, all over the place, weirdly, the one thing that's been consistently always world class this year is their defence. Out of almost literally nowhere, New Zealand now have the second best defence in the world. The way they do things is actually pretty old school. Whereas the vogue has been to apply pressure by focusing on either individual players from the opposition or the area the ball might be headed, New Zealand just mind their own business. It's unaggressive, but it's composed and it's consistent. Their aim is to cover every blade of grass, to leave no inch undefended. This might sound obvious, but teams like South Africa and even Ireland themselves like to leave hard to reach areas tactically undefended in order to free up bodies to be able to apply more pressure elsewhere. New Zealand, instead, no such risk. They play it safe, players spreading to cover the entire field, the full width. So, obviously, it took Ireland just 51 seconds to break them down. Whilst Ireland didn't cross the line until minute 14, we did see structures, plans, ideals that would take them to the tries in the opening stanza. A pretty phenomenal passage of play that really made you think the All Blacks aren't quite the dominant force they once were. To emphasise just how impressive that opening for Ireland was, I want to compare it to the first attack of the game by Wales a few weeks with the first actual attack by Wales a few weeks ago, who I think is pretty fair to describe as the kind of average platonic ideal of an All Blacks opponent. In both cases, the attack is sparked by a bomb from Beauden Barrett taking a deflection in the air into a player's arms, and in both cases the attack starts around the 10-metre line in the team's own half and lasts exactly 8 phases. However, whereas Wales do make some ground then lose it, resulting in a total net gain of about 6 metres, Ireland go forward on 7 out of 8 phases and make a total of 41 metres, entering the All Blacks 22. There are 2 key stats that tell us exactly the difference between Wales and Ireland. 1, Ireland complete their 8 phases in 57 seconds. Ireland's quickest ruck in the passage lasts just over 1 second. That's impossibly quick, but their slowest takes about 4, right? Wales, their quickest ruck takes about 4 seconds, their slowest lasting 9. In international rugby, ruck speed is everything. The only way to guarantee a defence will not be set. However, Ireland further shifted the point of focus through moves like this, the runner out the back as a decoy, positioned well away from the space to drag Leonard Brown, New Zealand's key defensive decision maker, as far away from where Ireland intend to actually attack as possible. This also pulls Severis up from the backfield to block the pass to Conway, meaning, if we check back moments later, Beauden Barrett has dropped out the line to cover the backfield, 50-22 and all that. Anton Leonard Brown is in the ruck here, Rico Ioane out wide, so Ireland carry in and recycle the ball in about a second and a half. The backs haven't reorganised at all, and there's now even fewer forwards, meaning Blackadder screams at Laulala to drift. He works too hard, Keenan can easily step him, and then the next phase, the All Blacks focus on marking the space, not the men. A spread too thin to compensate, and Jolly Poop's ex-grunge can pop an inside ball and cross the gain line again, with quick ball keeping being constantly just generated from here. It really gets going. Across the 8 phases, Wales passed a pretty standard 13 times. Ireland, in contrast, passed 20. This, coupled with the speed of the ruck, changes the point of focus so sharply and regularly. There's one downside to this style, and it's how this passage actually does end, in fairness. Eventually you just run out of numbers, you run out of people to pass to, you run out of points to focus on, and it leaves Sex Dongle isolated and the clear out illegal. However, when Jam hamster Sex Long, a man who probably gets angry if the postman delivers to any other house before his, stands up, he applauds. He's not frustrated by the penalty, he's encouraged by the play. They do this a few more times, and they have the All Blacks on the ropes. And it's funny I should mention ropes. Lately, the form of Will Jordan and the try-scoring record of Severin Rees has left Crusaders winger George Bridge with few starts and much spare time. And that's why, in that spare time, George Bridge has decided to start George Bridges Rope Bridges. It's just, he needed one more thing before he could get it up and running properly, before it was really a business that he wanted to call his own. So George headed to Squarespace. He knew without a website, nobody in the Greater Auckland area in need of a flimsy transportation across a small body of water would know where to look. He knew if he tried to make it with HTML and all that traditional nonsense himself, nobody would take his very serious business very seriously. Thankfully, Squarespace makes making a website easy. Point, click, drag, drop, create a new page, add an image, change the header, change the description, add text. It's all so simple, the whole lot. And then when George comes to sell his rope bridges, it's no trouble to install a shopfront to add items to set up everything to work and sell online in a matter of minutes. Next time you need a rope bridge, head to George Bridges Rope Bridges. But the next time you need a beautiful, clean website made simply, head to Squarespace and use the offer code Squidge Rugby for a discount at the checkout, or cut out the middleman and click the link in the description. We've seen a few approaches to opening the All Blacks' every blade of grass defence this year. Australia tried to force them into focusing on certain areas and contract them. South Africa tried to cut the grass by just blitzing through them really hard and really fast. But Ireland instead turned New Zealand's own tactics into a challenge for them. You plan on covering every blade of grass, do you, mate? Yeah, right. Good luck with that. Ireland made them work. When Joe Schmidt left the Ireland job to spend more time with his son and Andy Farrell took it in order to spend less time with his, there was a lot of confusion as to how he would approach things. He spoke of a new system but was promoted for continuity. Would he change things or stick with the old ways? We've had 2 Six Nations of Ireland attempting to spruce up their attack, but when they've been at their best, they've been when they focused on the ruck and line out. It's been quite hard to tell up until now what Andy Farrell's Ireland is. On Saturday, we found the answer, and it's the exact midpoint between the two things that we should have really anticipated. Ireland's tactics on Saturday were essentially how they beat them in 2018, but in the complete opposite direction. Both Irelands are keep ball teams. They hold onto the egg thing, put huge emphasis on their own breakdown, and force the opposition to make endless tackles. Farrell's Ireland aren't quite up there with Schmidt's side or Exeter in terms of how they can dominate that statistic, but they make up for it by playing with a greater pace and ambition. This is a superb stat posted by Opta, so thank you, kudos to them, but on only 8 occasions have a Tier 1 nation ever been forced to make upwards of 135 tackles in an international match, and 6 of them were teams playing against Ireland under Farrell or Schmidt. Farrell is, at heart, a defence coach, and his attack is built from that experience. It's not flashy or fancy, it's just the kind of system a defence coach would hate to face the most. It's a worst of both worlds situation. You can't make countless tackles and be watching wide, aware that at any moment after a dominant forward carry, Jade Leg Sexpud could drop in a little kick across the line like this. Dalton Papali'i made 29 tackles in this game. That's the same number as Ireland's entire starting backline put together. Joe Moody, the member of the All Blacks pack who made the fewest tackles, would have been Ireland's top tackler on Saturday. New Zealand said they're going to cover every blade of grass, so Ireland called their bluff and made them, and it was exhausting, and it led to opportunities in which they just couldn't. After the All Blacks pause this more, Gibson Park exploits Ioane shooting out the line and puts Ringrose into a little bit of space. The ruck is fast, New Zealand still setting up, setting wide, and there's a closing hole that Doris spots and calls. He makes a big carry, and Ireland just drive for a few phases. Temptation in this part of the pitch is often to just go and go and go and go and go until you crash over, but Ireland know they don't need to do that. After just a few phases, all 8 Kiwi forwards are within 2 metres of this ruck. Check how near Bowden Barrett is, with Leonard Brown again working round from the far side. Sexton pulls it back and Archie throws a pearl of a pass. Now I'm just going to draw here the path Bodie Barrett takes. This zigzagging to mark the ball costs New Zealand vital fractions of vital seconds and allows Keenan to put low over to score in the corner. It's a really good finish. This speed of ball is only possible because of how efficient Ireland are at the breakdown on their own ball. To look at this, I pulled a random passage of Ireland in possession from the end of the first half. Ireland play 9 phases here, and on only 2 of their occasions are their clear-outs completely or pretty much legal. Now, this was the 8th test Luke Pearce has refereed since we found out Henry Slade was right and there's no such thing as COVID and rugby resumed. And I skimmed back through 6 of the previous 7 because there's no one if you make a rewatch that god-awful Wales v Georgia game from last year. And I could only find 1 penalty from all 6 games against the team in possession for sealing off or doing anything to prevent the opposition contesting the ball. Part of why Pearce is probably the best referee in the world right now is that he lets the game flow. He's incredibly consistent, but he's always slightly harsher on the defensive team than he is on the attacking team because that makes for a better game. And the sole penalty he did give was the exception that proves the rule. Here in the final minute, Wales negatively trying to run the clock down and block France's chance to compete for the ball and challenge for the win. Penalty against Wales for being boring. So Ireland, having done their research on the referee, knew almost anything that isn't blatant or dangerous goes when it comes to securing their own ball, frequently just flopping over, blocking off, sealing off. So long as they avoided any team's head and shoulders, they'd be grand. This allowed them to just whip the ball away in about 2 seconds, too quick for Pearce to even contemplate penalising it. Playing the referee isn't cheating, it's a core part of rugby, it's a core part of the game, and Pearce was still superb on Saturday, just Ireland were in that area as well. And it came in handy for the second try, wonderfully constructed and eventually finished by Ronan Kelleher. Ireland form a maul, tying the Kiwi forwards in, and play away the second they commit. Both Jiggly Sex Trousers and Tommy Wise-Low are out of eye line, wrapping around, and Doris just checks both the centres, slowing their drift, meaning Rees has to come in on Sexlow and Low and can find space and free Conway. With the defence all herring it across, Conway can then step into the 22. Having worked it from one touchline to the other in 6 passes, Ireland go to the middle in 3. James Ryan, knowing he's the guy picking the line, but New Zealand having no idea which runner they're tackling. They then set up to continue spreading wide to wide, and Gibson Park's body language sells this. But he switches it back into Doris, who attacks around the fringe of the ruck. In looking to cover every blade of grass, New Zealand spread too thin, and he makes an easy carry, then Van der Fleer flies off quick ball into an unprepared defender, marching them all backwards. Keenan and Ringrose combine nicely, wriggling up an extra few metres, and New Zealand are in huge disarray. Low almost squeezes through, he almost scores. Then it's this is an incredible tackle by Cody Taylor to prevent him actually scoring immediately afterwards, but it's only delaying the inevitable. Ball is still quick and Kelleher well met, but Henderson and Furlong make the difference. Furlong knocks the All Black tacklers off balance, but look how low Henderson gets, essentially wrapping up the ball and propelling it over the line. This is, in every sense of the word, a proper team try, and it almost feels unfair that only one player gets to actually score it. Across all 8 phases, Ireland vary their attack so wildly, from elaborate set moves to crash-ups around the ruck, even hit-ups 5 metres out, are trying to use the greater manoeuvrability of backs as well as the crash-bash power, bam, 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 bam of forwards, until eventually the All Blacks are tied in enough that they change it up again and sneak their hooker under their noses and over the try line. Ireland aim to make the All Blacks make decisions as individuals, not a collective. Here, a poor pass causes Heavy Rees to do the most 1980s kick professional rugby has ever seen. Totally aimless and terrible, just like every back used to do in the golden old days that never existed but elderly pundits still clamour for. The chase is almost as bad. No Kiwi contest, but they all honeypot in around the defence, and it leaves Rieko Ioane completely left alone. Geordie Barrett sprints up to cut off the space, but it leaves the backfield behind him exposed, and Jiminy Cricket's ex-sergeant prods it in to pile pressure back on New Zealand. The interesting thing about the Irish kicking game is less how they kicked and more how they chased. The vogue has become to kick shorter, so you can put maximum pressure on the catcher, multiple chasers and players there to watch for the tap back, but Ireland reverted back to older tactic of bombing it long and giving it enough time in the air the winger alone can chase it and get there to make a tackle. Conway here disconnecting from the main line, out on his own to just smash whoever catches the ball. It allowed Ireland to net territory, the All Blacks' instinct being to reply by kicking shorter, using the modern tactics. I should probably also touch on the try by Caelan Doris, which feels like the result of all those tackles New Zealand were being forced to make. It's very simple, some might say, and I would say, too simple for international rugby. Terrible positioning here by David Havili, who calls Cody Taylor out, opening a huge hole on his inside and leaving him with too much work to do to get back and make an effective tackle on such a dynamic carrier like Doris. You want to credit Ireland here with something clever, but there's not really much. It's just terrible, it's really bad by the All Blacks, and this should never be a try in 2021. Never in Test match rugby should this be a try. Ireland didn't have it all their own way, but I think weirdly the things the All Blacks did best highlighted their own actual limitations. Every positive about Ireland was part of a coached, considered collective effort. Even the outstanding individual performances, the likes of Caelan Doris, Jack Conan, James Lowe, all felt like the best cogs in a very cool clock. Not one-man team efforts like Peter O'Mahony 3 years ago, where you'd wonder if they'd still win without him. The All Blacks' finest moments this year have all been because a very basic system or opposition error gave an individually brilliant player a situation where they could do something individually brilliant. Cody Taylor's try begins as a variation on this move that has become quite popular in the last 6 months. Player peels away from maul as it forms and targets the token player left to defend on the tail. One guy runs an inside line, one guy runs an outside line, and the player passes to them for a big grain line crash. However, Kelleher drifts into Leonard Brown. Furlong just points at Taylor, and it opens up. He never needs the pass. Papali'i fires through, draws the fullback, and Cody Taylor only has to be quicker than a few fellow front rowers to make it to the line. This is one All Black being smart enough to spot an easy defensive slip-up, and the second score is James Lowe just falling back on bad habits. He called people out after the game for criticising him for always biting in, but what does he do? He bites in. This is awkward. Havili spots it, fires a great pass, and Will Jordan, being magic, does the rest, admittedly with little help from Rieko Ioane. The All Blacks haven't really constructed the major try all year, just gone through the motions until something opened up. There's a lot of outrage that no South Africans made the shortlist for the World Rugby Awards, and I agree, Dylan van der Merwe very much would have deserved a spot, but the biggest mystery is the inclusion of Ian Foster. Simply put, New Zealand are the second least imaginatively coached team in Test rugby right now to Canada. There's more thought and innovation going in with Portugal or Chile, whose Pablo Lemoyne, I feel, was a far harsher snub than Jacques Nienaber for that award. Foster's contract is up for review at Christmas, and you wonder whether he now needs to beat France next week for a few cheap wins over easy opponents and not be enough to paper over the cracks. As for Ireland? Well, I went back and checked my video for when Ireland last beat the All Blacks in 2018, and first off, good God, doing this challenge has aged me. I think the Six Nations this year alone was worth at least a decade. I'm a haggard old man now. But in that video, a far younger, sprightlier version of me said Chicago was a sign Ireland can beat anyone on their day. Dublin is a sign they can beat anyone on any day. I think Dublin Part 2 Remix Taylor's version is actually even more encouraging. In 2016 and 18, Ireland probably played to about 98 and then 95% of the total capacity at the time. Those were teams executing as well as they humanly could and taking down a foe who were almost superhuman to them. I reckon Ireland on Saturday, this week, were probably at about 82%. In fact, based on how the two teams played, I think New Zealand were probably closer to their absolute peak than Ireland were, and Ireland won by 9 points. Of course, the big challenge for Ireland has always been learning to execute when there's pressure on both teams. It's easy for them to get up for a Grand Slam decider or a test against a world-class side who are so used to winning they won't approach the game any differently to others, but now they need to back it up and keep it going with the Six Nations on the horizon. Because right now, it's hard to shake the idea that we're looking at Ireland who are, once again, on the verge of peaking the year before the Rugby World Cup. Oh! That was the other game I forgot. It was a quarter-final. They lost they got absolutely battered in a quarter-final, didn't they? Oh man, they got smashed. Oh, I'd forgotten about that. It was so unlike them. Sorry, that's why I forgot. Look, and seeing as they're likely to match up again in a quarter-final in 2 years' time, you've got to say, if Ireland could pull that one off and back this up, that certainly would then be an upset. Look, I'm a Welsh fan. We haven't beaten the All Blacks in 60 years. You can't blame me for doing that every now and again. Thank you very much for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. There's plenty more coming. I have broken my little finger during a game of touch last week, which meant I've had to work far slower. I've had trips to the hospital and so on, and all of that, which is why I haven't got to Scotland, South Africa, or any of the other games from last weekend. I apologise. But this is, of course, now going up before the weekend, so thank you very much. There's more obviously to come on the final weekend for the Autumn Internationals, and I'll see you next week for that, coming very soon. We've also got the podcast as well. We've got a new episode with Jamie Lally, wonderful, incredible, excellent commentator you might be hearing on some of the Autumn games. He talks to us about his background as well as the Scotland v France game from the original World Cup, Scotland's first ever World Cup game and France's first ever World Cup game. You can see that's available to download. Anyway, I'll see you next week for more rugby.